Letting my best friend stay in my home was the biggest mistake of my life. Amara thought she had the perfect life. From the outside, everything looked exactly the way she had always dreamed it would be. A loving husband. A beautiful home. Peaceful evenings filled with laughter. And a best friend who had been by her side through almost every chapter of her life. For years, Amara believed she was one of the lucky ones. Her husband, Daniel, was the kind of man many women wished they could find. He was calm, responsible, and hardworking. The type of man who always came home after work with a warm smile and asked about her day before even talking about his own. Daniel wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was dependable. And for Amara, that mattered more than grand gestures. They had built their life slowly, step by step. The house they lived in wasn't the biggest in the neighborhood, but it was warm and full of life. The walls carried memories. Laughter during dinner, quiet movie nights on the couch, and the occasional playful arguments about which show to watch. And then there was Nadia. Amara's best friend. The person she trusted almost as much as her own family. Amara and Nadia had known each other for nearly 15 years. They first met in secondary school when they were both assigned to sit next to each other during class. At first, they barely spoke. Nadia was the confident one. Bold, outspoken, and never afraid to say what was on her mind. Amara, on the other hand, was quieter. More careful with her words. The kind of person who listened more than she spoke. But somehow, their differences pulled them together instead of pushing them apart. Over time, they became inseparable. They shared secrets no one else knew. They comforted each other through heartbreaks. They celebrated birthdays, graduations, and every major milestone side by side. When Amara met Daniel years later and started dating him, Nadia was the first person she introduced him to. And just like most people, Daniel liked Nadia immediately. She had that kind of personality. She was funny, charming, and knew exactly how to make people laugh. Whenever Nadia visited, the house felt louder. Full of jokes and playful teasing. Daniel sometimes joked that Nadia brought too much energy into the house. But everyone laughed when he said it. At the time, it all felt harmless. Looking back now, Amara would realize something important. Sometimes the people who seem the most fun to have around are the ones who slowly begin to cross boundaries you never imagined they would cross. But at that time, Amara didn't see any danger. She only saw her best friend. The person who had stood beside her through years of friendship. The person she believed she could trust with anything. And that was exactly why she never questioned the phone call that came one evening. The call that would quietly begin the destruction of everything she thought she had. It was a rainy Thursday evening. Amara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when her phone rang. The screen showed Nadia's name. Amara smiled immediately and answered. But the moment she heard Nadia's voice, something felt wrong. She sounded different. Tired. Broken. Amara, Nadia said softly. Can I talk to you? Amara's smile faded. Of course. What happened? There was a long pause before Nadia finally spoke again. I think everything in my life just fell apart. Nadia explained that she had broken up with her boyfriend. They had been living together for almost 2 years. But after a huge argument, things ended suddenly. And now she had nowhere to go. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. I don't know what to do, she said quietly. Amara didn't even need to think about it. The answer felt obvious. Come stay with us, Amara said immediately. Just until things get better. On the other end of the phone, Nadia was silent for a moment. You're serious? She asked. Of course, Amara replied. You're my best friend. Later that evening, Amara told Daniel about Nadia's situation. Daniel nodded sympathetically. That must be really hard for her, he said. Then he shrugged slightly. Well, she's your friend. If she needs a place to stay, she's welcome here. Amara felt relieved. At that moment, everything felt like the right thing to do. Helping a friend. Opening her home. Doing what anyone would do for someone they care about. 2 days later, Nadia arrived with 2 large suitcases and a tired smile. Amara hugged her tightly at the door. You're safe here, she said warmly. Nadia smiled back. Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you. At the time, those words sounded sincere. But sometimes, the people who thank you the most are the ones quietly preparing to betray you. And Amara had no idea that the moment she welcomed Nadia into her home, she had unknowingly invited a storm into her life. A storm that would slowly destroy her friendship, her marriage, and the peaceful life she once believed was perfect. For the first few days after Nadia moved in, everything felt normal. Almost too normal. Amara did everything she could to make Nadia feel comfortable. She prepared her favorite meals, made sure the guest room was clean and cozy, and even bought fresh flowers to brighten the space. Stay as long as you need, Amara told her one evening while they sat on the couch together. Nadia smiled gratefully. You're the only person I can rely on right now, she said softly. Amara believed her. After all, this was her best friend. But slowly, small things began to happen. Things that were easy to ignore at first. Things that seemed harmless. Until they weren't. One morning, Amara woke up early to prepare breakfast before Daniel left for work. As she walked into the kitchen, she stopped in the doorway. Daniel and Nadia were already there. Standing close to each other. Laughing about something. Amara hadn't heard Nadia come downstairs. When they noticed her, both of them turned quickly. Oh, good morning, Nadia said with a cheerful smile. Daniel cleared his throat slightly. Morning, he added. Something about the moment felt strange. Not wrong exactly, but strange. Amara brushed the thought away. Maybe they were just talking. Still, she noticed something odd. Nadia was wearing one of Daniel's hoodies. Amara frowned slightly. That looks familiar, she said. Nadia glanced down and laughed casually. Oh, this, she said. It was on the couch last night. I was cold. Daniel shrugged. It's just a hoodie, he said. Amara nodded. Of course it was. But something about it stayed in the back of her mind longer than it should have. A week passed. Then another. And slowly, Nadia began spending more and more time in the living room with Daniel after dinner. Sometimes they would talk about movies. Sometimes about work. Sometimes about random topics that made them laugh loudly. At first Amara joined them. But after long days at work, she often felt tired. So some nights she went to bed earlier than the two of them. One night, Amara woke up around midnight to get water. As she walked down the hallway, she heard voices from the living room. Daniel and Nadia were still talking. She stopped for a moment before entering. Nadia was telling a story that made Daniel laugh loudly. Amara stepped into the room. Immediately, the laughter stopped. The room felt strangely quiet. Oh, you're still awake? Daniel asked. I just came to get water, Amara replied. Nadia smiled quickly. We were just talking about old school memories. Amara nodded slowly. But something felt off. Why had they stopped talking the moment she walked in? She tried to ignore the feeling. But the silence lingered in her mind. As the days passed, Nadia began behaving less like a guest. And more like someone who belonged in the house. She walked around the kitchen as if it were her own. She started choosing the music that played during dinner. Sometimes she even answered the door when visitors arrived. One afternoon, Amara came home from work earlier than usual. She expected the house to be empty. But when she opened the door, she heard laughter from the living room. Daniel was home. And Nadia was sitting beside him on the couch. They were watching a movie together. Nadia's feet were tucked comfortably under her. Daniel held a bowl of popcorn. When Amara walked in, both of them looked surprised. "Oh, you're home early," Daniel said. "Yeah," Amara replied slowly. Nadia smiled. "We were just watching a movie." Amara nodded. But something about the scene bothered her. It felt too familiar. Too comfortable. The comments began shortly after that. Little things Nadia would say during conversations. Things that seemed harmless, but slowly started to cross boundaries. One evening during dinner, Daniel was telling a story about a difficult day at work. Nadia listened carefully. Then she said something that made Amara pause. "You deserve someone who understands how stressful your job is," Nadia said softly. Amara looked up. "What do you mean?" she asked. Nadia laughed lightly. "Oh, nothing. I just meant your work must be exhausting." Daniel didn't respond. But the comment lingered in the air longer than it should have. Later that night, Amara found herself thinking about it. Was Nadia suggesting something? Or was she just overthinking? The moment that truly unsettled Amara happened 2 weeks later. She had gone upstairs to take a shower. When she came back down, she heard voices in the kitchen. Daniel and Nadia were talking again. Amara paused near the corner of the hallway. She didn't mean to listen. But then she heard Nadia say something that made her heart skip. "You're too patient with her sometimes," Nadia said quietly. Daniel sighed. "You don't understand." Before he could finish his sentence, Amara stepped into the kitchen. Immediately, both of them stopped talking. Daniel looked up quickly. "Oh, hey." Nadia smiled again. That same calm, friendly smile. "We were just talking about work," she said. But Amara knew something wasn't right. Because for the first time since Nadia moved in, a feeling she had never felt before began to grow inside her. Doubt. And deep down, a quiet voice in her mind whispered something she didn't want to believe. Something that terrified her. What if letting Nadia stay in their home was a mistake? At first, Amara tried to convince herself that everything was fine. Maybe she was just being paranoid. After all, Nadia was her best friend. Someone she had trusted for more than half of her life. And Daniel. Daniel had always been loyal, calm, and respectful. So she told herself the strange feelings in her chest were nothing. Just stress. Just overthinking. But the tension in the house began to grow slowly, almost invisibly. Like cracks forming in a wall that once looked strong. One evening during dinner, something happened that Amara would later remember very clearly. Daniel had just come home from work looking tired. His shoulders were heavy, and he barely touched his food. "Long day?" Amara asked gently. Daniel sighed. "You have no idea." Amara began to suggest that maybe he should take a few days off to rest. But before Daniel could respond, Nadia spoke. "Honestly, Amara, I think you worry too much." Amara looked at her, slightly confused. "What do you mean?" Nadia shrugged casually. "Daniel is a grown man. He can handle his responsibilities." Daniel nodded slightly. "Yeah. Nadia's right." Amara blinked. It was such a small moment. But something about it felt strange. Normally Daniel valued Amara's opinions. But now he was agreeing with Nadia instead. Amara forced a smile and continued eating. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. Soon, Amara started noticing something else. Daniel and Nadia were talking a lot. Sometimes about work. Sometimes about random things. Sometimes about topics Amara wasn't even aware of. One evening, Amara came downstairs to grab a glass of water. She stopped halfway down the stairs. Daniel and Nadia were sitting in the living room, talking quietly. Daniel was leaning forward slightly, listening closely to something Nadia was saying. Then Nadia laughed. Not the loud, playful laugh Amara was used to hearing, but a softer laugh. A more personal one. The kind of laugh people share during private moments. Amara stepped into the room. Immediately, both of them turned toward her. "Oh. Hey," Daniel said quickly. Nadia smiled. We were just talking." Amara nodded. But she noticed something strange. Daniel moved slightly away from Nadia on the couch. Another uncomfortable moment happened a few days later. Amara was cooking dinner while Nadia sat at the kitchen counter. Daniel had not come home yet. Nadia watched Amara chop vegetables. Then she said something that made Amara pause. "You're really lucky, you know." Amara looked up. "Lucky? To have Daniel?" Amara smiled slightly. "Yes. I know." Nadia rested her chin on her hand. "Men like him are rare." Amara laughed softly. "Well, you'll find someone too." Nadia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at the kitchen doorway, as if thinking about something. Then she said something strange. "Maybe. But sometimes the right person is already in front of you, you just don't realize it." Amara frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" But Nadia just smiled and changed the subject. At the time, Amara didn't think much about the comment. But later, she would replay those words in her mind over and over again. Slowly, Daniel began to act differently too. Not in obvious ways, but in small, uncomfortable ways. He stayed up later at night. He spent more time downstairs with Nadia. Sometimes when Amara asked him to come to bed, he would say, "I'll be there soon." But an hour would pass. Then another. And Daniel still wouldn't come upstairs. One night, Amara woke up around 1 a.m. Daniel was not in bed. She walked quietly down the hallway. The living room light was on. Daniel and Nadia were sitting together again, talking quietly. When they noticed her standing there, both of them looked startled. "Oh, you scared me," Nadia said. Amara forced a smile. "I couldn't sleep." Daniel stood up quickly. "I was just about to come upstairs." But something about the moment made Amara feel like an outsider. In her own home. The tension finally exploded one evening. Amara had been feeling uneasy all day. So when Daniel came home late again, she couldn't hold her frustration anymore. "You've been spending a lot of time with Nadia lately," she said. Daniel looked surprised. "What are you talking about?" "You know what I mean." Daniel frowned. "She's your friend, Amara." "Yeah," Amara replied. "But she's supposed to be my friend, not your best friend." Before Daniel could respond, Nadia walked into the room. She had clearly heard everything. "Are you serious right now?" Nadia asked. Amara looked at her. "I'm just saying things feel different lately." Nadia crossed her arms. "Amara, you're being paranoid." Daniel nodded slightly. "She's right." That hurt more than Amara expected. Her own husband taking Nadia's side. Again. Amara shook her head slowly. "No, something is not right here." But neither of them said anything. And in that moment, Amara realized something terrifying. The home that once felt peaceful now felt like a battlefield she didn't understand. And she had no idea that the truth was about to destroy everything. The night everything finally fell apart started like any other night. Nothing felt unusual at first. Dinner had been quiet. Daniel barely spoke, and Nadia seemed distracted, scrolling through her phone while occasionally glancing at Daniel in a way Amara couldn't quite understand. The air in the house felt heavy. But Amara tried to ignore it. She told herself she was imagining things again. After dinner, she cleaned the kitchen while Nadia and Daniel sat in the living room watching television. Every few minutes, she could hear Nadia laughing softly at something Daniel said. That laugh. For some reason, it bothered Amara more than anything else. Still, she kept telling herself the same thing. You're overthinking. Around 10:30 p.m., Amara felt exhausted. I'm going to bed, she said as she walked past the living room. Daniel nodded without looking away from the television. Okay. I'll be up soon. Nadia smiled. Good night, Amara. Amara went upstairs, brushed her teeth, and climbed into bed. She expected Daniel to follow soon. But he didn't. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Then an hour. The quiet in the bedroom felt strange. Daniel never stayed up this late before. Finally, Amara closed her eyes and drifted into a light sleep. But sometime later in the night, she suddenly woke up. Her eyes slowly opened. The room was dark. For a moment she didn't understand why she had woken up. Then she noticed something. The space beside her in the bed was empty. Daniel still hadn't come upstairs. Amara sat up slowly. Her heart began beating faster. A strange feeling crept into her chest. She told herself there was a simple explanation. Maybe he had fallen asleep on the couch. Maybe he was finishing some work. But something inside her refused to calm down. She slipped out of bed and walked quietly into the hallway. The house was completely silent. The living room lights were off. Daniel wasn't there. Amara's stomach tightened. She walked a little further down the hallway. And then she saw something that made her stop completely. The light in the guest room was on. Nadia's room. Amara's heart began pounding loudly in her chest. Why would Daniel be in Nadia's room? Maybe he just went in there to ask her something. Maybe he was helping her with something. But then Amara heard something through the door. Voices. Low whispers. She moved closer slowly. Her hands trembling slightly. At first she couldn't understand what they were saying. Then she heard Nadia's voice clearly. Soft. Almost playful. You worry too much, Nadia said. Amara froze. Daniel's voice came next. This isn't right. There was a small pause. Then Nadia spoke again. She doesn't suspect anything. Amara's entire body went cold. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Her mind refused to believe what she was hearing. Her best friend. Her husband. Talking like this. Behind a closed door. Inside her house. Her hand slowly reached for the doorknob. Her fingers felt numb. Part of her didn't want to open the door. Because deep down, she already knew what she was going to see. But the other part of her needed the truth. No matter how painful it was. She pushed the door open. And the world seemed to stop. Daniel and Nadia were sitting on the edge of the bed. Close. Too close. Daniel's hand was resting on Nadia's knee. Their heads turned toward the door at the same time. Both of their faces went pale. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt suffocating. Amara couldn't move. Her heart felt like it had shattered inside her chest. Every strange moment from the past week suddenly made sense. The whispers. The late nights. The secret conversations. The hoodie. The laughter. The way Nadia defended Daniel during arguments. The way Daniel slowly began taking Nadia's side. It had been happening all along. Right in front of her. And she had been too blind to see it. Nadia stood up quickly. Amara. But Amara raised her hand. Don't. Her voice was quiet. But it carried a pain so deep it made the room feel colder. Daniel tried to speak. It's not. Don't lie to me, Amara said. Her eyes filled with tears. But she refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not tonight. You're both disgusting, she whispered. Daniel looked down at the floor. He couldn't even look at her. That hurt more than anything. Nadia stepped forward again. It didn't happen the way you think. Amara laughed. A broken laugh that sounded nothing like her usual voice. Oh really, she said. Then explain it to me. Neither of them spoke. And that silence was the only answer she needed. Amara felt something inside her collapse completely. The two people she trusted the most in the world had betrayed her. In her own home. Under her own roof. She looked at Nadia. The girl who had once been like a sister to her. You came into my house crying, Amara said slowly. I gave you a place to stay. I trusted you. Nadia couldn't say anything. Then Amara turned to Daniel. And you? Her voice cracked for the first time. You were my husband. Daniel still couldn't meet her eyes. And in that moment, Amara realized something painful. She had already lost them both. Not tonight. Not in this room. She had lost them the moment Nadia moved into the house. She just hadn't known it yet. And the worst part of all was realizing that the person who destroyed her life was the same person she had once called her best friend.